Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My colleague Chris Hipkins referred to being in Nigel Roberts' class in 1998 and going through various options on electoral referendum. I can go back a little further when Mr Hipkins was just a little bit young. Perhaps he's gone now, so I can say these things about him. I shouldn't say that, Mr Speaker, but he in 1993, when the 1992, when the original referendum was going through, I was a student politician at Otago University, and also into 1993 when we had the second referendum. And it would be fair to say that we put a lot of effort in as students to promoting MMP. In fact, I can recall trying to justify it to a group of students on the basis that we would have the imaginatively named student party that would contest elections and be able to secure 5% of the vote, and we would have students in Parliament. It was an interesting idea, not perhaps one now that I'm quite as keen on as I was then, but I think what that reflected, as a number of other speakers have said, is that there was at that time, after both a Labour and a national government that had operated, in the words of a current member of our Parliament, in quantum leaps through the 80s and the 90s, with what some would say was disregard to the views of the electorate, putting in place programs that had not been put before the electorate. There was a mood in the country in the early 1990s to punish, I actually think, not so much Parliament, but in fact the executive, or two executives in a row from two different parties. And I think that mood was pervading the country, and it was rife for change. It was rife for a change about not only the speed of government, which is what I think was happening in the 80s and 90s, but also the extent to which this Parliament was representative of the country. And I too am prepared to proudly say that I am a supporter of proportional representation, and I am a supporter of the MMP system. For two reasons that I want to discuss now that are relevant to this bill, Mr Speaker. The first of those is the representative nature of this Parliament. And we can say, statistically, we can look at the number of women members, we can look at the number of Māori members, we can look at the number of members representing ethnic minorities in this country, and say that demonstrably MMP has meant that this Parliament is more representative. And that is a good thing, Mr Speaker. It's a good thing too that political parties who can earn more than 5% support in this country get to be represented here, because to me, Mr Speaker, that means that there is a viewpoint out there that should be heard. And it may well be that I think that the ideas that Mr Boscawen and his colleagues put up are frankly bonkers most of the time, but they have a right to be heard here. And he probably thinks the same about me and the Labour Party. But the fact is that parties deserve to be here if they can earn that 5%, and I will return to that question in a moment. So I think that what we have is both an MMP system that's allowed government to operate more slowly, on more of a consensual basis, and I think both the Labour Party in office and now the National Party have developed ways of making MMP work, of making coalition governments work and including parties. The risk for all parties is where those arrangements do not appear to the electorate to be governing in a fair way. The classic tail wagging the dog situation, Mr Speaker, that I think is where the public becomes concerned about elements of MMP. But overall, I am strongly of the belief that this Parliament is a better and more representative place because of the system of proportional representation that we have here. And I don't believe, actually, Mr Speaker, that the public is in the same mood to punish politicians in the way that they were in the early 1990s, and in part that is because MMP has required politicians to work in a more consensual way, in a slower way, and we've had a more representative Parliament to do that. But what we now find ourselves facing is this referendum, and the Labour Party obviously is supporting this as part of an overall package around changes to the electoral system, and we're happy to do that. We're particularly happy to do that because of the question of there now being spending caps, and I'll return to that in a moment. But I do think that we do have the cart somewhat before the horse when it comes to the two referenda that we're looking at under this bill. I strongly believe that if we are going to do this, and there is some question in my mind about whether it is necessary, but if we are going to be doing this, then we should be reviewing the system first. And we should be reviewing the system first because there is, I think, widespread acknowledgement among those of us who are strong supporters of MMP that there is room for improvement. And the particular area where I think there is room for improvement is the question of the so-called electorate lifeboat. The situation whereby, and in this Parliament it's represented by the ACT Party, where because Rodney Hyde has won the Epsom seat, we are now treated to the spectacle of 5 ACT MPs in this House. Now, whatever people might think of the Right Honourable Winston Peters, his party polled 4.3%, I think it was, in the last election, and they are not represented in this House. And the question has to be raised whether or not that electorate lifeboat is in fact fair. If the ACT Party are polling 3% of the vote, why do we see them now represented in this House in a way that a party with 5 MPs rather than just the 1 MP who won the electorate? And I do think that's an area that could be relooked at. And of course it is noted in what will be in the review should the first referendum lead to a second referendum, Mr Speaker, then the review would take place and it would include that question around proportionality and around how people are represented. But I do think that that's a particular area that could be looked at. There are obviously other issues that need to be looked at. Some people have raised the concern about the mix of electorate and list members. Mr Woodhouse has just mentioned the questions around the size of the electorates, and I think a number of members of Parliament who represent electorates are concerned about that issue. So these are questions that I think could be dealt with in a review prior to a referendum so we know what we're really discussing. Now, as it happens, we will get that review if we go to a second referendum. The review should happen anyway, Mr Speaker. That's what we believe on this side of the House. We think it should happen first. In any case, regardless of what happens in the first referendum, there should be that review so that we can clear up some of these matters, because I would like to disagree with one thing that my colleague Chris Hipkins said when he said that all New Zealanders would be familiar with first past the post. That's actually not true in my opinion. I think for people under the age of 35, they know nothing other than MMP when it comes to a voting system. And actually I believe that in actual fact that question around what people understand about the systems is a moot point. I think there's a lack of understanding across the board around this, and I very much endorse Catherine Delahunty's and Steve Chadwick's comments about civics education, Mr Speaker. I think it's one of the things that in this country we need to do significantly better at, is helping people understand from an early age how the voting system works, what their role is in society and how they can influence decisions. So, Mr Speaker, I think it's quite clear on this side of the House that we're happy to support this bill given the changes that have been made to it, but I do believe that the timing and the sequencing of the referenda and the review have put the cart before the horse and unnecessarily are going to perhaps confuse some people, but I do think we could certainly find our way to a situation where we do the review anyway, regardless of the outcome of the first referendum. Mr Speaker, I want to talk about 2 more things in my contribution. The first of those is around the question of the spending cap. And the spending cap of $300,000 I am very pleased to see there. I acknowledge the fact that it is difficult to come up with a number here. Why 300,000 instead of 500,000? But what the committee has attempted to do here is get the balance right between participant equality and participant freedom in elections. This is something that Andrew Geddes from Otago University has written about. And that is a difficult balance in every electoral system in the world. The freedom for people to participate, like Mr Boscawen, and put his money in to a particular issue, and the equality question of how do you make that fair so that elections can't be bought, so that referendum can't be bought. It is a difficult balance, but I believe the committee has done the right thing by putting a spending cap in place here. And we know that the likes of Peter Shirtcliffe are interested again. Mr Shirtcliffe is out there promoting the supplementary member system that Mr Key now seems to favour. It is not a proportional system in the terms that it has been put in front of the electorate. It means that only 30 of the 120 seats will be allocated on a proportional basis. 90 of the 120 seats are just first past the post. That is not proportional representation, Mr Speaker, and I'm sorry to say that I think Mr Shirtcliffe will try to present it that way, but it is not. So, Mr Speaker, in conclusion, I believe that the bill has come back in a much better shape from the committee. The fact that we have a spending cap now in place will ensure, to some extent, participant equality balanced with participant freedom in this referendum. And I would urge all of us as MPs to ensure that we work hard in our electorates to make sure that people understand as much as possible about this referendum and about what the options are. From my own point of view, I believe that MMP has served us well over the last 14 or so years, and I would like to see it continue, but we are committed on the Labour Party to supporting this bill so that the referendum can take place in an orderly manner.
call David Bennett.
Thank you.